Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you to descend into darkness with a chilling anthology of horror stories, each one inspired by true events. This is episode 24. Let the nightmare begin. The nets at Blackwater Marsh. Elliot closed the door behind him and was alone in the cottage at last. All dwellings have a smell, an atmosphere. You get used to the smell of your own place so that you never notice it, at least not until you first open the door after a long holiday. The house Elliot had shared with his ex-wife. The back door had opened into the laundry room, so after returning there was always a smell of clean linen and washing powder. He missed that. He hadn't lived in his flat long enough to imprint his own scent identity upon it. It smelled impersonal, of polish and plastic like a motel room. The door he had opened led into the kitchen, which was north-facing and cold. The smell here comprised of dusty old carpets, furniture polish, and coal smoke. The faintest undertone of when this had been someone's home rather than just a holiday cottage, but almost wiped away by long, empty winters and the landlady's cleaning regime. After finding and using the toilet in the bathroom upstairs, Elliot began to explore. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs, one double, one single, with a Z-bed under one of the singles. The main bedroom was comfortable enough, though plainly decorated and furnished. Elliot unpacked some of his things onto the dressing table. Coming downstairs and opening the door into the lounge, he noticed a crucifix on the opposite wall. He didn't like it, but at the same time to actually take it down would be to attach a level of importance to it with which he was not comfortable either. But to Elliot, it had the effect of adding a chilly austerity to the place, despite the warmth from the clicking radiator and a log fire in the grate, reminding him that this was not his home. Disconcerted, he looked around the rest of the room. That was more like it. A couple of old fishing prints on the wall to his left. One in particular caught his eye, and he walked over to examine it more closely. It was a watercolor of 3 men positioned waist-deep in seawater, each standing with outstretched arms holding a rectangular framed net that protruded above the water chest height and was about 4 times as wide. "Hoff Netters, Solway Firth," ran the caption underneath. The water was skillfully painted, the way the current flowed through the nets and around the fishermen. The figures were not so well executed to Elliot's untrained eye, being somewhat indistinct, which had resulted in a surely unintentional, comically sinister expression on one in particular. Hoff Netters, the unusual word intrigued him, sounded Viking or something. Putting a log on the fire, he decided he would have a quick walk down to the river, just to get a feel of the place and check out any likely spots. No point in taking his tackle until he had the license sorted. Elliot was glad to be setting out for the river. As he stepped out, he noticed a definite and sudden change in the atmosphere. Mist was falling. He walked downhill to the T-junction and turned left this time, leaving the church and the center of the village behind him. He narrowly sidestepped a dead mouse and a big pile of dog mess on the pavement. Looking ahead, he could see the mist already thickening into a solid bank where the road dipped down towards the river. Through the light haze, he could see a hunched figure walking ahead of him, an old man in a blue car coat, also heading in the direction of the Eden. The man was walking so slowly that even though Elliot was some 50 yards behind, he could already see that he must unavoidably catch up with him. With any luck, he'll turn off into one of these gardens. But he didn't. Elliot considered crossing over to avoid the man entirely, but thought better of it. A moment's kindness costs nothing. This will be me one day, he reasoned to himself. As he drew level with the stooping figure, he offered a friendly hello. The old man turned. A very old man. Deeply wrinkled skin, an unhealthy shade of yellow. Dark hollow eyes, hooked nose, bushy gray hair, and large nostrils. Roughly shaven. How do, gruffly. Then, in a sharper tone, "Where's the going?" "Fishing." "Yes. Well, just have a look at the river," began Elliot. "You've forgotten your rod. Gonna catch them with your bare hands? Hey, you're not one of them Hoff Netters, are you? Not in your pockets?" Only couple of fellers got caught poaching salmon last week with a Hoff net. Elliot's expression must have suggested puzzlement. In fact, he was staring at what appeared to be a large wound on the old man's neck, sewn up with a rough suture that almost looked like fishing line. One of them big sea nets they use up on the Solway, about 6 feet across. Collapsible frame to fit under their coats. You just set them up and the fish swim in and get themselves all caught up. They'd set it up there and was driving fish in. Elliot was unsure whether the tone was joking or accusatory. Either way, he didn't like it, not least because the volume was embarrassingly loud. He noticed 2 large hearing aids in each of the man's large, fleshy ears. No, I'm just going for a walk. I'm picking a license up from the pub when it opens later. Gamekeeper's about, you know. Folks is keeping watch. Okay, thank you. Whereabouts are you going fishing? Sorry? I'm not sure yet. Get yourself onto Cetera Bank. You don't need a permit there. The man jabbed a crooked finger to the right, the direction Elliot was planning to go anyway. Okay, said Elliot and crossed the street, agitated and vaguely aware of a couple of onlookers to this awkward, noisy encounter. The old man continued shouting after him as he went. I know all about the permits. Ask Martin Kell. He'll tell you. There's no permit there. Cetera Bank's where you need to go. You need a rod, though. Elliot quickened his pace to get out of earshot, passing in front of the village's outdoor swimming pool. So much for being friendly. Wish I hadn't bothered. The silly old sod. The mist was thickening now, but he could already hear the sound of the river. The air was cooler still, damper. Elliot pulled his coat around him, but the mist seemed to seep underneath it, as if his very bones were cold and the coat was only warming the surface of his skin. Here, though, was the reason he had been drawn to this place. The river. From the edge of the swimming pool car park, he craned to soothe himself with the sight of the water as it surged and hurried along with the friendly, vibrant chatter of old friend who, no matter how long it's been since you last saw them, instantly and easily picks up a familiar thread of conversation. The river. This at least was ever new. Every moment, every second changing, not like the stagnant pool of urban life. The heavy mist gave the Eden a Stygian aspect today. Gray-white smoky clouds lifting from the surface of the torrent and seemed to morph into cloaked figures, raising their arms skywards in a slow, twisting, hallowing, dissipating dance of veneration for the waters of time that rushed away beneath them. But as a fishing spot, Elliot's current vantage point did not have much to recommend it. The stream was fast-flowing here, and the bank was sheer and crumbling. Too many overhanging bushes and clumps of willow hub to tangle a line in. Besides, it didn't offer the seclusion he was hoping for with the road and swimming pool just behind. Through the mist, he could just make out sheep grazing on the sandy banks on the other side. But the Eden itself looked promising. There were sure to be some deeper, more alluring pools upstream. Elliot started to walk along the path. As he did so, he saw a sign nailed to a tree, black block type on whiteboard, lightly covered with green mold. No fishing without a permit. North Yorkshire anglers. What they got to do with them, thought Elliot. We're a long way from North Yorkshire here. The smell of the swimming pool, now closed for the season, pervaded his nostrils. Disinfectant, sweaty summers, a faint hot dog smell. All he could see of it was a rear wall, gray breeze blocks, and litter behind a wire mesh fence. Before the pool was here, people would have bathed in the river itself, but it would be considered foolish, even weird to do so now, he supposed. The gravel track along the riverbank behind the pool led into a field which had been designated as a campsite, complete with standpipes and electric sockets. Now it was quiet, just one large trailer tent pitched, right next to the path in the far corner, next to the stile. As Elliot passed it, he inadvertently caught the eye of a woman inside through the plastic window, sitting having a drink. He gave an awkward nod and smile, conscious of having his own privacy invaded while unwillingly having invaded someone else's. After the campsite, the path dipped down and a narrow wooden footbridge crossed a small tributary of the river. Passing over its heavy, rotting planks, Elliot felt a renewed sense of freedom, putting the village behind him. Just me and the country, me and the river, me and the mist. Water on one side, land on the other. But wait, was that figure crouching up ahead, or just a tree stump? A few more paces, and it was clearly a figure, hunched over a rod. "Morning. Any luck?" said Elliot cheerily. Another ancient face turned to meet his. "Not yet, but any time now," crackled a well-weathered voice. Small, dark eyes and hooded eyelids beneath an old, battered black waxed fishing hat with home-tied flies hooked in. The same deep wrinkled sallow skin as that obstreperous old bugger in the village. And that wasn't all. Just visible beneath the hat was a long, snaking scar sealed with the same rough stitches Elliot had seen on the other man's neck. Remind me not to go to the doctors round here, thought Elliot. But, observing the custom of the riverbank, he paused to take an interest as the man made a few casts. At the third cast, the rod dipped, and there was a satisfied chuckle from its master. In a display of surprising strength and dexterity, a good-sized trout was smoothly and firmly ripped out of the brown depths without even a token fight, its furious thrashing on the hook rendered utterly futile. "Pass me the priest, would you?" said the fisherman. "Sorry." Elliot was still taken aback at the easy violence of the catch. "The priest, yon little wooden club. Hurry up, man." Elliot picked it up and handed it over. A strong smell rose from the man's open tackle box. Damp, earthy, maggoty. The elderly angler now lifted his rod vertically so that the thrashing hooked fish came spinning rapidly towards him, spraying slime, weed, and river water. At the first attempt, he assuredly grabbed the fish with one hand and in a single swift movement bashed it sharply over the top of the head with the club held in the other. "They call this a priest, see? Gives him the last rites." Elliot saw blood trickle from the corner of the trout's mouth as it shuddered in its death spasms. The fisherman gave a grunt of satisfaction and stuffed it into a grubby carrier bag. "Folks was down here with a half net," said the man as he turned back to the river and cast again. A definite insinuation in the tone of voice. "Yes, an old chap in the village told me. By the way, you don't know where Cetera Bank is, do you?" A derisive snort. "Cetera Bank. You're miles out. That's up Gamblesby Way, across the river, man. I hope you can swim." Once again, the volume was embarrassingly loud. To add to his discomfort, a dog walker emerged out of the mist, an old woman, and had evidently overheard. She shared a smile with the angler and shook her head with a scornful tut at Elliot. To his shock, he noticed that she also had the same sagging, yellow, wrinkled complexion as the old man. Her dog was some sort of enormous sheepdog on a heavy chain. It growled at him as he shrank out of its path. "Maybe I misheard him," said Elliot as the woman and her dog merged into the mist. "No, you don't want to listen to old Norman Cray. He's gone ahead. Everyone can tell you that. They'll have a right laugh at you in the Midland tonight, listening to old Norman. He said something about it being somewhere you didn't need a permit." The man shook his head. "You want to get yourself to Blitterlee's Gill. Get across yon bridge there." A dismissive flap of the arm to the right, further along the bank. Elliot hesitated. "Sorry? Blitterlee's Gill," repeated the fisherman impatiently. "Get yourself along there. No point stopping here. Where's your rod anyway? Sure you're not one of them half-netters?" "No, I'm not. I left my rod back at the cottage. I'll pick it up later once I've got my permit." "I thought you was looking for somewhere to fish without a permit." "No, I'm going to get a permit. It's just that the other chap told me." "Well, it's a long way back for it, but suit yourself." Elliot turned away without saying goodbye. What was wrong with everyone round here? Why was every exchange so bloody hostile? And what was the matter with their faces? He'd heard a medical condition called Derbyshire neck. Maybe this livid yellow and deep wrinkling was Cumbrian face. He threaded his way further along the path, into the deepening gloom. It was so dense now, he could hardly see further than an arm's length. The path rose and fell sharply over tree roots, He experienced the peculiar sensation of stepping into space as he underestimated the slope and found his foot falling further than expected. But always there was the comforting chatter of the river to his left to guide and console. But still smarting from the encounter with the man in the black hat, Elliot did not heed the warning of the misstep and continued at a pace that was inadvisedly hurried. At the top of the next rise in the path, his toe clipped a root at the foot of a large sycamore, and he slipped over, pain in his left knee. He heard soil dislodged by his fall cascading down into the water to his left. Falling was a shock. He couldn't remember the last time he had fallen right over. He could feel damp from the ground soaking through his trousers, invading his comfort, piercing his fragile shell of well-being. Amid the smell of disturbed earth and crushed thistles, a moment of realization that the unremitting noise of the river would have continued regardless of whether he fell in and drowned in its depths. As Elliot sat there, tried to assess the state of his knee, a figure loomed out of the mist. Another ancient voice. "Steady on there, lad. You'll be in river. What's the rush?" This time, it was a rotund man in a fleece and green woolly hat. The same yellow, deeply wrinkled skin, a brown woolen scarf around the neck. "Not from around here, are you? You're not one of them half-netters." "No, I'm on a fishing break. I'm staying in a holiday cottage." "Have you got a permit?" In spite of himself, Elliot suddenly felt ridiculously flustered. "I was going to get one later." That's what them said last week. If the gamekeeper sees you, he'll turn out your pockets." Elliot struggled painfully to his feet. He could put weight on his knee, but it had lost power somehow. There was also earth and stones in his shoe. Where was you headed, anyway? Blitterlee's Gill. Harsh, openly mocking laughter. "Ha ha ha, what a daft caper. You'd be lucky to get there by nightfall. That's way down t'other side of Langwathby. You'd be better off at Lacey's Slack." The man seemed to study Elliot for an uncomfortable moment, but then headed off into the mist, back in the direction of the village. Unsettled, Elliot decided it was time he headed back too. After allowing a pause so that he wouldn't catch up with the rotund man, he began to gingerly retrace his steps towards the village, carefully testing his knee at every footfall, watching the path at his feet closely now for any more hazards. He had made slow progress in this way for no more than 10 yards when he was startled by a violent shout to his left. "Got lost again, have you? You're going the wrong way. Lacey Slack's back yonder." The words seemed to be yelled with real anger. Elliot staggered back in alarm, sending more earth tumbling down the bank into the river. It was the rotund man. Had he stopped and waited deliberately? The man tooted, "Bloody fool," and turned away, apparently into a field. Elliot was unsettled now. The mist no longer a protective blanket, but a threatening veil. A noise from behind? Was someone following him? The dank atmosphere was disorientating, muffling some sounds, magnifying others. His knee prevented any rapid progress in any case. More anxious yards passed. Now he saw an outline of a figure rising from the riverbank to his right. It was the fisherman in the black hat, priest in his hand, shouting furiously. "Turn back, have you? Thought I told you to get to Blitterlee's Gill." Elliot put his head down and tried to ignore him. "Just focus on the path." "Damned half-netters," yelled the man, manically waving the priest in the air. Up ahead, Elliot could hear a dog barking. A big dog. The wrinkled woman. Was she still here too? Panicking now, he could see the outline of a public footpath sign leading back to the village, away from the river, across fields. He stumbled across long wet grass through an open field gate, his trousers soaked below the knee. He could hear a bell tolling in the mist. The village must be to his right. The fog blanket wasn't quite so dense away from the river, and he could make out two gnarled old shapes in the center of the field amid the long, gray, creeping fingers. Bushes, hawthorn bushes. He set his course to the right of them, looking for a gateway that would lead him back to the village. But now another figure emerged ahead, blocking his intended path. It was the first old bugger in the blue coat, the deaf one. Elliot noticed with alarm that the man was moving much more rapidly across the field towards him than he could have ever given credit for. "Hey, where are you sneaking off to? This is private land. You were told to go to Cetera Bank." Elliot was gasping now, the cold air and the fear catching at his breath. He looked back across the field to see a silhouette of the rotund man emerging from the left. Now he heard a metallic clang that reverberated oddly in the clammy air. The gate closing behind him. Over his shoulder, a glimpse of a group advancing with purposeful menace. "Hoy, come back here. The gamekeeper wants a word with you." The throaty rasp of the black-hatted man. Another deeper, aggressive male voice. "Get back here, you bugger." A dog whimpering and growling. A coarse, female voice now. "Shall I let him loose, Johnny?" On my signal, Elliot struggled on in the only direction that lay clear between the old hawthorns. Ignoring the pain in his knee, he moved as fast as he could, a lolloping, uneven gait born of sheer terror. They were all old. Surely he could outrun them? But the dog, he could hear its horrible, guttural growls and whimpers, straining for its handler to release it. Hostile shouts rang out from all sides, hallooing, harassing, hounding him onwards. "Get the son to Lacey's slack. Stupid bugger. Will you not listen? What did I tell thee? Lacey's slack. Blitterly's gill, man. Cetera Bank." He reached the bushes, the land between them bare. He ran on, between their twin, twisted embrace of mottled lichen and mossy bark. He ran on, straight into wispy, misty net of something suspended from the trees. Something intangible. He was stuck fast. Desperately, he tried to turn round, but couldn't. Every movement he made served to bind him ever more closely, to sap his strength, his vitality. With his ever-weakening struggles, panic turned into peaceful acceptance. His feet were no longer on the ground. Unsure of the direction of north, south, east, west, earth, sky, life or death, he lay suspended between two worlds. Gray, swirling mist floated before his weakening eyes, but whether it was from this realm or another he could no longer be sure. Dark shapes danced and contorted around him, blotting out the last strains of his sunlight. The residual part of Elliot's consciousness heard a host of footsteps, heavy breathing, both animal and human. Voices. Satisfied, pleased voices. "He's a nice one. Good size. The old Hoff net still does the trick. Ready with the priest. Hold him still now." What remained of Elliot felt sharp crack to his temple. A trickle of warm blood down his face. More voices, distant now. At the mouth of the tunnel, he felt himself sliding down. "We'll gut him and eat him tonight. Hit him again, Johnny. The gills are still blowing. Don't damage him, though. Could do with a new skin." What remained of Elliot felt sharp crack to his temple. A trickle of warm blood down his face. More voices, distant now. At the mouth of the tunnel, he felt himself sliding down. "We'll gut him and eat him tonight. Hit him again, Johnny. The gills are still blowing. Don't damage him, though. Could do with a new skin." The Drowned Stillness. I've lived in Central Florida my whole life. Disney World, mosquitoes, the beach, and flip-flops are a way of life. I'm used to the sticky, hot humidity, the gator-filled swamps, and the tea-stained water of the St. Johns River. This is where my tale takes place. Horrifying and unbelievable, yet true. I don't know when I first heard tale of the Dead Zone, a stretch of Interstate 4 between Sanford and DeBary, Florida. Legend has it that the founders who settled in the area became ill of yellow fever residing in the mosquito-infested lagoons and scrub of palmettos, which is where they succumbed to the abyss named Death and found their final resting place. For over a century, their plots were marked with wooden crosses, and they owned their own place amongst the moss-draped oaks. There's lots of tales surrounding these graves. Some say a man tried to remove the fencing that was at some point placed around the markers, and that very night his house burned down. Another account alleges that a curious young boy tried to dig up one of the graves and was killed by a drunk driver shortly after. Myth or truth, I'm not sure. Many years later, when the developers came in and wanted to build what us Floridians call I-4, they were sworn to build the road around the graves of the settlers, as to not disturb them. They agreed with a handshake and a smile. But as we all know, their intentions were set before the empty promise was made. Instead, they opted for what was easy and logical, disturbing, and paving over top of the burial site. The tale goes to tell of ghostly sightings, travelers dealing with late-night car troubles, and more accidents on that stretch of road than you can imagine, all at the consequence of the deceitful agreement that disturbed the dead. Now, I've never been one to really buy into the paranormal, and I've driven this stretch of road hundreds of times. I've witnessed several accidents and broken down vehicles on the shoulder, but never did I feed into the dead zone theory. If every disturbed grave became a ghost story, we'd have more tales to tell than we could keep up with. But what I witnessed with my own eyes, driving that stretch of busy road, peering over the St. John's River Bridge, is something I will never forget, something I cannot shake, and something that has forever changed me and my view of the paranormal. It began over a year ago when I had just started a new job. I had to drive past the dead zone, exiting right across the bridge at the Sanford exit. I-4 can be a white-knuckle experience, especially if you have to drive it daily. But the part one always enjoyed was approaching my exit, breathing a sigh of relief that I had not been victim of any road rage or accidents, and peering off the bridge into the murky brown waters below. Something about the way the sun shone down, reflecting itself in sparkling ribbons across the gator-infested stretch, lily pads dancing with every swirl and breeze across the water, boats drifting lazily while fishermen cast another line, made me feel at peace. It was early on that I noticed the two houseboats floating aside the lily pads. I had seen them before, many times in fact, but it was after starting the job and having it be a part of my daily drive that I began to wonder how long the boats had been there. They looked abandoned, old, and decaying. I remember thinking, who comes to rescue deserted vessels? Or do they float along until they sink? The houseboats troubled me, for no apparent reason other than the fact that they had become a stationary landmark on the waters that upset my peaceful feeling with a darker and more foreboding impression. I could imagine what horrors lay behind the surface, and in my mind's eye saw a mummified corpse, jaw locked open, forever staring into eternity. Abandoned. Forgotten. Surely the owners of the boats hadn't jumped into the waters and swam to shore and left their boats cast off into the lily pads to sit until what? I could only imagine the poor soul who decided to one day board the craft to discover my dreamed-up corpse. Perhaps more than one corpse. And then just like that, one day, one of my sinister houseboats was no longer there. I almost couldn't believe my eyes, as I was sure it had been there for as long as I could remember, and there was no way the motor on the boat would still run. It had been there the previous morning, though I couldn't be certain that it had been there on my way home as I was going the opposite direction and could not see to that side of the bridge. I tried to imagine what had gone down as I made my way to the office and parked my car. A coworker of mine was exiting her car as I pulled up, and I decided to ask her if she had ever noticed the boats, since she drove the same stretch of road that I did. I made my inquiry, and to my surprise, she informed me that she had noticed the boats, and she had also seen a tenant of one of the boats out on his deck, sweeping. I was shocked. Never, in all the years I had seen the boats, had I ever witnessed a living soul on or around them. But she swore to seeing what appeared to be an older gentleman on its deck. He was definitely there, she stated. I know what you mean about the boats looking abandoned, but there was for sure a man on board, sweeping off the deck. Have you noticed how the lily pads have gotten thicker around them and are almost vining up the boat? I had not noticed. Not really. I knew the boats were in the thicket of lily pads, but I hadn't noticed them getting thicker. No, my attention seemed to be on the boats, and only the boats anymore. I no longer watched the sun-dappled waters and the fishermen's lines. Now, I watched the boats, searching for signs of life, imagining horrors that I had drummed up in my mind. And now that there was just one boat, I couldn't fathom where the other boat went. Perhaps whoever comes for old abandoned boats had finally come and taken it away and would be back for the remaining boat another day. Weeks went by. The houseboat didn't occupy all of my thoughts, but I did perk up when approaching the bridge, and I did make sure to be in the far right lane for the full length of the bridge till my exit. I wanted to see the boat. I had to see the boat. I wanted to see if there were signs of life or movement or anything to prove that it actually had someone aboard. The lily pads did seem to thicken, and the words, "vinding up the boat," seemed fitting. They appear to be growing right up the side. I didn't think that lily pads could do that. I thought they grew on top of the water, but did not have the ability to vine out or attach themselves to a boat. Some days I thought surely my eyes were playing tricks on me. Then one day there was a man. Yes, a man aboard the boat with what appeared to be a broom, pushing the lily pads off the side of the boat back towards the water. I tried to slow a bit before reaching my exit. I was in shock that, for one, there was actually a person who must have been living inside of the boat, yet I had never before seen, and two, that the lily pads seemed to be infesting the waters by the boat and overtaking its side. The man continued to push at the lily pads, and I watched until I had to turn into my exit and could no longer see him or the boat. Day by day, I grew more uneasy when reaching the bridge. I never saw signs of life near the boat again, but I still continued to watch it. I guess you could say I was fascinated by it, and my mind worked up horror tales that gently rocked the waters of my mind, although I supposed it was just a dilapidated home on the water for some lonely old man. It did seem that the lily pads were making themselves even more of a nuisance, and eventually they reached the front railing of the boat and were tangled all around it. Each day, they seemed to claim another inch of its surface. My horrors came to life one humid August morning. There were very few cars on the road at this early of an hour, and the only reason I was coming into work so early was to make up for some hours missed earlier in the week. The sun had barely breached the horizon, leaving shadows in the corners where the pre-dawn light still couldn't reach. I approached the bridge with sudden apprehension, as if my mind knew there was something sinister going on before my eyes could bear witness. As soon as I could see the water, I saw the mass of lily pads that had grown up over the top of the boat. The entire boat seemed to be covered by them, and they were seething, writhing, and wrapping themselves tightly around the vessel. In a matter of seconds, the boat appeared to give in, and with a screech of twisted metal and a loud crack, it was crushed as though it were nothing more than an aluminum soda can pull down into the murky waters. The last thing I saw before reaching my exit was a bubbling, rippling mass and a few gentle waves that rocked the surface where the boat had been just moments before. In hindsight, I'm surprised I didn't stop my car right there in the middle of the bridge's right lane, because my mind was racing and my heart was pounding, and I felt sick and uncertain all at the same time. Did I just witness a mass of seemingly alive lily pads eat a houseboat? The thought swarmed my mind, echoing itself over and over again as I drove down the exit ramp. As I reached the light at the bottom of my exit, instead of heading to work, I turned toward the boat ramp near where the houseboat had been anchored, driving with reckless abandon and throwing dust and gravel in my wake before coming to a halt. I don't remember getting out of the car, but I remember running toward the water. I saw no sign of the boat, nor the man who lived on the boat, Mr. Halbridge, and by now the sun's rays were starting to peek over the treetops and land in the dark places. The tree line most likely prevented my view of where the houseboat had once been, and there was no way I was going to enter the water to wade out until I could see something. The world seemed to stop for a moment, and I thought I was going to faint. I could hear the rush of blood in my ears and my heart throbbing in my head, but the outer world was quiet. In one rush, it all came back. The noise of the cars on the bridge, the water lapping at the shore, and birds singing and chirping. I leaned forward and vomited. I called the police once I was able to form a coherent thought. I told them what I had witnessed. I told them it was unbelievable but true. I stayed at the boat ramp until they came and took a statement from me, but I could see the way the officers looked at each other, and by the tone of their voice and the way they spoke to me, that they didn't believe a word of what I was saying. They asked if I was on any medications or had a history of mental disorders. I disputed both and pleaded with them to have Diverse search the water. They assured me they would look into it. I felt like I was speaking in slow motion, and watching the two officers constantly exchange sideways glances made me want to punch them in the face. They didn't believe me, and it was obvious. In their defense, I probably wouldn't have believed me either had I not been the one to witness it. Eventually, they left, but not after asking if I had someone who could pick me up since I seemed shaken. I told them no, I didn't, but I would be fine. I sat in my car and turned the air conditioning on as high as it would go and leaned my seat back. I guess I fell asleep. I couldn't have been asleep long, but I did dream. I dreamt I was sitting at the water's edge with people I had never met. The river's embankment allowed my feet to dangle over the dark brown water, and the smell in the air was stagnant with undertones of rotting vegetation. The world seemed muted, as if in tones of sepia, and my heart was beating fast. I felt nervous, but I didn't know why. No one was talking, just staring out at the water. Everything was still and silent other than the buzzing I heard from mosquitoes. The buzzing seemed intolerable, as if it were coming from the inside of my head. I could feel the mosquitoes swarming and lighting on me. I slapped one from my legs, and it exploded in a burst of dark red blood. I felt a trickle of sweat from behind my knees. It was all so very real. Other than being able to move my hands and slightly turn my head, I felt frozen in place. I knew I couldn't stand up, let alone move or run. The heat was getting unbearable, and the air was so thick I thought I would suffocate. I looked beside me, and there was a man leaning against a tree. He was obviously not from this era, as his clothes were old-fashioned and dingier than anything anyone these days would wear. There were some children and a woman sitting by the water's edge as well. They never looked my way or spoke a word, just stared blankly toward the water. Finally, the man looked straight at me with a bone-chilling stare and spoke with a voice both cold and hollow. The road to hell has been paved with lies and deceit. We no longer sleep. It never ends. Before I even realized what was happening, he had grabbed me by the hair and pushed me forward toward the water. My hands grabbed at the dirt and leaves, but the struggle was futile. I felt myself falling and hit the water, breaking the surface like crashing through a dirty window, sinking, unable to breathe, being drugged deeper into the depths of water and muck. I awoke with a start, sweating profusely, my car no longer running. No more than 30 minutes had passed since I had gotten in and cranked it up. As I set my seat back in the upright position and started to turn the key, I looked down to see a smudge of blood right where I had slapped the mosquito in my dream. A few weeks later, while watching the news, I heard a body was found in Lake Monroe, which is fed by the St. Johns River right across the bridge I drove over daily. The body appeared to have been gnawed on by alligators, which is creepy enough, but what was worse was that no one had been reported missing. The body had no ID, and no one could figure out who it was. He was a nobody that nobody missed. I wondered if it was Mr. Halbridge, the older guy from the houseboat. I guess I'll never know. I eventually quit the job I was working, not for any related reason, although the drive to work now brought much stress and trepidation, and nausea swept over me every time I reached the bridge. I would find my eyes locked on the spot where the houseboat had once been, and more than once, I came close to rear-ending another car. I could hear the words, "It never ends," the gravel and fury in his voice as he spit them at me. Part of me thought that one day the bridge would just disintegrate as I was crossing it, and I would plummet downwards to be swallowed whole into a watery grave. I now avoid this stretch of road at all costs. I've always heard we should face our fears, but in this case, I find I can't. I never found out if the houseboat was recovered. I don't think anyone ever looked for it. I called the Sanford PD once to check on the status of the report I filed. The lady I spoke with put me on hold, and when she came back on the line, she told me it was pending investigation, then threw in a, "You all right, doll?" I told her I was fantastic and figured I was probably the butt of a good joke to them, and decided not to call back. Aside from recounting my story to two people close to me, I've never uttered a word about it to a soul. Am I crazy? Did I witness something beyond the realm of reality? Or did the dead zone come alive and claim a few more victims? Because even though I wasn't physically harmed, I consider myself a victim of its lore. I know my dream was of the early settlers. I know I witnessed a mass of lily pads come alive and swallow a boat. I know I'm not crazy, but I will never be the same. So, if you're ever in Central Florida and you drive the stretch of Interstate 4, somewhere between Orlando and Daytona Beach, know that there's more than meets the eye. There's a tale that keeps telling itself, in more ways than one, and it wants to be heard. The road to hell was paved with lies and deceit. And just a word of advice: stay out of those waters. There are things more dangerous than the mosquitoes, snakes, and alligators. I've seen for myself. So if you're ever in Central Florida and you drive the stretch of Interstate 4, somewhere between Orlando and Daytona Beach, know that there's more than meets the eye. There's a tale that keeps telling itself, in more ways than one, and it wants to be heard. The road to hell was paved with lies and deceit. And just a word of advice: stay out of those waters. There are things more dangerous than the mosquitoes, snakes, and alligators. I've seen for myself. The wheel beyond reality. The following happened to me 7 years ago while I was a sophomore in college, and it was my first experience with any drug other than weed. Great choice, right? There are many things in this report that are downright stupid and reckless, ranging from lack of research to reckless dosing. As I said, this was 7 years ago, and I have learned how to be responsible with drugs now. However, at the time of the report, I was a fool. In fact, this experience is the main reason why I'm extremely cautious and heavily research any drug I am interested in taking to this day. I first heard about salvia a year before this experience from a friend who lived down the hall from me in my dorm. He described it as a legal psychedelic. It's legal in Oregon and available in almost any smoke shop. That was super fun and a lot like weed. Those who know how wrong this are probably rolling their eyes about now. I tried it a few times at parties in a social setting, usually in a circle of people, again, stupid I know. I never experienced any effects other than slight spinning and loss of balance, mainly due to the fact that we didn't know how to smoke it properly. We used shitty small pipes, didn't hold in hits long enough, and didn't really know what to look for. Fast forward 1 year later, I was at the local smoke shop in my town, buying a new glass bong, like a first real piece. Since I was out of weed, I decided to pick up a gram pack of 20x salvia as well, since I wanted to test this new masterpiece out, although I had not the slightest clue what 20x stood for at the time. Remember, at this point, I thought it was kind of like weed, but made you dizzy/giggly for a few minutes. I tried it a few times in the preceding week, but didn't experience any effects other than what I described above, likely due to my failure to hold in the hits and my poor bowl lighting technique. I still thought this was fun. Eventually, I had most of the pack of salvia emptied, with enough for one large bowl left. I decided the following day would be a fun time to try it out and got some rest. I woke up early the next day and went on a bike ride with my friends, who for the sake of anonymity I'll refer to simply as Leo, Miles, and Julian. We got back, and after relaxing for a bit, I decided to finish off the bag of salvia once and for all. What a waste of money this was, I thought. With the exception of Julian, none of my friends were interested, so he and I stepped out into the garage, and I sat down on the stairs and get everything ready. Next to the stairs is an old wooden fence lined with saplings and one big tree. Behind it is my neighbor's field, which had a bunch of little kids in it, running around and screaming playfully. I packed the bowl, a big bowl piece, to the brim with the remaining salvia 20x extract. My friend Julian was too scared to try it since he'd heard from others about its potential to create nightmarish effects. Yeah, right, I thought. So he agreed to sit and watch me. Here goes nothing. I leaned down and torched the bowl as hard as I could. The bong filled up with way more smoke than my old pipe ever could, and I torched about half the bowl in a single hit. Since this was the last of it, I decided to hold the hit as long as I could in order to maximize the effects, which is why it finally worked. After about 35 seconds, I exhaled and noticed I was feeling weird as fuck. So, like any sane 18-year-old who had no idea what they were doing, I torched the rest of the bowl in one gigantic hit and cleared the chamber, then held it as long as I could. After I exhaled for the second time, Julian asked me how I was feeling or if it was bunk again. I tried to ask him how come he was talking so weird, but all that came out was slurs. At this point, my vision started chopping, like everything around me was being rendered by a flip book. I finally managed to say, "Oh shit, I'm gonna need a minute." Julian could tell something was up, so like a good friend, he went inside to watch TV while I proceeded to lose my mind. The last thing I remember of this reality was Julian walking past me, back into the house. At that point, everything was just starting. As I said before, everything in my field of vision slowed down and was being chopped up. I moved my hand in front of my face and could see that it wasn't actually moving in front of my face, but that it was actually being drawn across my field of vision like an animation or a flip book. This is hard to describe. The best I can say is, imagine it as a flip book. With each frame, the hand moved a little bit more across my vision, but it wasn't actually moving, it was being rendered. As soon as I realized this, I understood that I was watching reality being created instant by instant, and it isn't a constant stream of conscious like we perceive. Weird, I know. Imagine how I felt. As soon as this realization came upon me, I heard an incredibly high-pitched squeal and experienced the feeling of impending doom, like something of epic importance was happening. It was at this point that I completely forgot I had smoked salvia at all. Everything that happened after this was legitimately happening, or so I thought, and my reality was falling to pieces. I closed my eyes, thinking this was too much to handle. As soon as I did, I was in another world. The prior 2 minutes of my life were laid out in front of me like snapshots, with each picture representing a single instant of time. The pictures were being flipped to demonstrate the effect I mentioned above, the flip book, and show how reality was being created. The pictures then split apart, and I was shown what existed behind existence, what is actually happening behind the curtain of our day-to-day lives. At this point, I had no memory of my life at all. As soon as the pictures split, I was sucked into the space between them, which I was told by a disembodied female voice I could not place, that this was the place between moments. We perceive life as a continuous stream, but in actuality, reality is completely destroyed and recreated between each instant. In other words, each instant is a page of the flip book, and the previous page is destroyed and replaced with a new one. These pages were being flipped by an enormous wheel, which was the source of the noise I heard earlier. I could feel this wheel pressing up against me, threatening to destroy me and replace the current me with the me from the next moment. Naturally, I was horrified and for some reason filled with déjà vu. I knew I'd been there before, which was weird because this was the first time I really smoked salvia. I cannot stress how powerful and massive this wheel seemed. It was the source of reality as we knew it, responsible for creating the universe around us. And it was touching me. The voice then told me that this wheel and this space is the only thing that truly exists. Reality, as we know, it is merely a side effect of the action of this wheel. My consciousness has existed in this space for all of eternity, being ground against this wheel, spinning with it, and helping it create reality. I somehow escaped it years ago, which coincided with my physical birth, but now it somehow got me back where I belonged. I felt utterly hopeless. My entire life had been a temporary escape into a dream in order to cope with being merely a cog in the wheel, both literally and metaphorically. And now that that illusion was broken, I was trapped here again, and the entire life I lived was merely a dream. All of my friends and family, as well as any experiences I remembered, never really happened and were just a cheap trick I used to distract myself. This was the real existence. The feminine voice told me that everyone around me are her children, and our purpose was merely to spin with this wheel and create reality. I looked around, confused, and realized then that I was surrounded by trillions of other little people like me, all of them trapped and spinning in order to create reality. They all screamed at me, help us spin. Stay with us. Now that you are here, you cannot leave. You cannot leave. You cannot leave. You cannot leave. You will never leave. You are US and we are you. It has always been this way, and it always will. These were her children, and I was her child as well. I had escaped, but now I was back. Naturally, this scared the shit out of me. I was in hell. I was always in hell, I just forgot. I was trapped there for what felt like an eternity. Time had no meaning in that place. Each second felt like countless years. Slowly, I began to forget my life on Earth. It was a dream as far as I was concerned, and it felt like I was forgetting it in the same way you forget a dream minutes after waking. I was dysphoric and terrified, and resigned myself to spinning for the rest of eternity. After what felt like thousands of years, who knows? In eternity, nothing means anything. 1% of infinity is still infinity. I remembered that I had somehow escaped into the dream world, normal, Earth reality, in the past, and maybe I could do it again. I didn't think I could get back into my old life, but maybe I could escape and, as the woman told me, be born again. Anything, even starting over in another life, would be better than that hell. I managed to turn my head to look at the wheel head on, desperately trying to see how I escaped in the past. I managed to turn my head so that I was looking at the wheel from the side, the flat side, so that it resembled a spinning two-dimensional circle. The wheel was divided up into slices like a pizza, or the wheel on Wheel of Fortune. The pieces were broad at the top and narrowed closer to the center. Each slice was a different color, and the edges were incredibly jagged and multi-hued. There were an infinite amount of slices, and the wheel was spinning infinitely fast. This made perfect sense in salvia space. In the face of infinite time, after all, what is infinite space? Each slice whizzed by my face, so closely that I could feel them pulling my face and grinding it down to my bones with an effect that felt almost electric. This felt pleasant compared to having my body constantly torn to pieces for all eternity on the other side of the wheel. As each slice rolled by, I stared intently at them. Slowly, I began to realize what I was seeing. The slices were moving so quickly that it took a while. Each slice was a moment in time belonging to someone in the dream world, Earth reality, and maybe I could use them to escape. As soon as I thought this, the female voice spoke to me again. She told me that escape was useless, and that even if I managed to escape into reality again, my return there was inevitable, either through death or by being stupid enough to smoke salvia again. I began to desperately claw at the wheel, trying to squeeze myself into one of the slices in the hope of inhabiting one of the bodies I saw represented. However, the wheel was spinning too fast, and when I touched it, it felt like electricity coursing through my body. Very painful. I fought through the pain and clawed at the wheel more and more until, very briefly, the wheel appeared to stutter and slow down. Hope surged through me, and I began to claw harder, which caused the electric grinding feeling to increase, but I didn't care. I pulled and pulled until the wheel slowed down enough for me to look at each slice individually. As I pressed each slice, I temporarily became the person in the moment the slice belonged to. I became an alcoholic old man sitting on a couch watching TV, wishing his children were still around. I became a young girl, talking on the phone with her friends. I became a father, screaming at his children, looking at his kids, cowering in the corner of his kitchen. I became a junkie in an alleyway, waiting for someone to walk by so that I could rob them. Each slice belonged to a person, and as I moved my hand up and down the slice, I went through their life. The top of the slice, the broad part near the edge, was the beginning of that person's consciousness, and the tip in the center of the wheel was the end, their death. Moving left to right on the slice represented the different realities that person existed in based on the decisions they made. This is why the slice was broad at the top and thin at the bottom. At the beginning of one's life, they have an endless amount of paths to choose, and as they get older and closer to death, there are fewer and fewer paths to take that can steer them away. I realized that each one of these people had smoked salvia at some point in their life, which is what opened their slice to me being able to enter it. In salvia space, you have access to the infinite timelines of others who have smoked it. For a brief second, I could see into the slice where I came from. I saw myself sitting on a stoop in my garage, sitting there with my head down and my eyes closed. Everything was distorted, though, as if I was viewing it through the window. I touched the slice and briefly became myself again. I opened my eyes and looked around, feeling incredible joy to be back here. I instantly felt my hands slip as the wheel sped back up, and I was torn back into salvia space and away from my body. I desperately clawed at the wheel, but it was moving too quickly. I would have to wait another eternity for the wheel to revolve again so that I could reach my slice. I debated trying to jump into another person's slice to get out of that hell, but I didn't know if it would work, or if it did, if I would effectively kill that person and take over their body. At that point, after experiencing so many other realities, I was having trouble remembering which one was mine. For those brief times, I fully believed myself to be the people in those moments. Who was I to say that the one I remember, a me on the porch in my garage, was really the reality I came from, or simply the one I touched last and remembered best? Fuck it, I thought. Anything is better than this. I waited until the wheel came around again, and I could see my slice coming up. I clawed at the wheel again, once more experiencing the electric, bone-drilling feeling until it slowed down. I grabbed my slice at the edges and thrust myself headfirst into it, as hard as I could, desperately trying to get back to where I had been. As soon as my head made it through the slice, everything exploded. My skin was peeled off of me into countless dimensions, and my body was torn and twisted into shreds. I fell into blackness. Surrounding me were pieces of the slice I tried to climb into. Each one was a porthole, like on a submarine, into reality, but at different times of my life. There was no order. The windows were scattered around me. I could see a moment from when I was in middle school, practicing the saxophone. I could see another of me sitting on a couch with my sister, arguing about something stupid. I saw several more that I did not recognize, with people I didn't know. I assumed these were from my future, or from the future of whichever person was being displayed, at least. I didn't even know if this was me anymore, or if this was just the slice I chose. I was afraid to touch these, as I didn't know if it would cause me to experience the moment as the slices had done earlier. I also worried it might toss me in at that point of time, further forward or back in time from where I had been. Then I finally saw something that looked familiar. I was sitting in the garage, loading up the bowl, and Julian was talking to me. The perspective was weird, though, and it seemed like I was looking up at myself from 30 feet away, as if I was deep in the concrete floor. I grabbed the window by the sides, and again, thrust myself forward as hard as I could. As soon as my feet made it through, I was back in my body, while in someone's body, I don't know if it was mine. At that point, I still had no memories. I was an empty shell in an unfamiliar body in an unfamiliar place. Slowly, my recollection started to return to me. I remembered events from my childhood and my family. I remembered I was a college student. I came out to do something. What, though? I looked around and saw the bong at my feet, and suddenly it all came back to me. I smoked salvia. I cried out. That's what caused all of this. I looked behind me and discovered I could still see the tear in space where I had pulled myself through. I heard children, laughing and chanting. I looked at the trees around me and could see them frantically working and creating everything around me. The trees stretched out and were trying to push me into the hole I came from. I instantly got up and ran to the other side of the garage, away from the trees and the rip I'd created. I turned around and looked through the door into the house. Everything was still distorted and spinning, and I could still hear the wheel's high-pitched shriek emanating from some unknown space. Slowly, the world became less choppy. I looked at the tear I had come through and saw millions of tiny children's hands reach through the other side, laughing hysterically the entire time, as if they found it hilarious that I had escaped. Did they know something I didn't? They pulled the rip closed, and it slowly melted back together as they chanted, "See you soon. See you soon." As soon as the hole closed, I could no longer hear the scream of the wheel. I heard the female's voice one last time, however. "Don't worry," it said. "You'll be back soon enough, my child. Enjoy your time." To this day, this is still one of the most traumatic experiences I have ever gone through. Immediately after I came down, I ran into the house and locked my bedroom door. Everything felt incredibly fake. I was shown how everything was made and how empty and pointless it all is. I had trouble talking to my roommates for a while because I saw them as philosophical zombies rather than as real people. From my newfound perspective, they were nothing but constructs, empty shells pretending to be people. Perhaps they even were part of the wheel. After all, I was the only person in this world. Everything else was created by the wheel. The most significant issue I had after this was that for a while afterward, I was convinced that I wasn't back in the right body. I was certain that my present body had existed normally until its former occupant decided to smoke salvia, at which point one of the wheel's children, my consciousness, hopped in while he was absent. I only have the memories I do because they're stored in this body. If I had grabbed onto another slice, I would have been thrown into that body, or shell, instead, and I would have slowly remembered all of their memories. In short, I hijacked this body, and its prior resident is now trapped in that nightmarish realm. I know this sounds insane, and I realize that now, but it felt so incredibly real that I still have my doubts every now and then. Now, 8 years later, I feel comfortable enough to talk about this experience. I have PTSD-like nightmares once every few months where I find myself back in that hellish place, and I always wake up in a sweat and run across the room to get away before I realize where I am and that it was a dream. I bought more salvia off of the internet, plain leaf and 5X, nothing stronger, in order to conquer my fear of the substance, cue laughter. I now smoke plain leaf rarely and 5X even less often and achieve an altered state of mind, but nothing of the magnitude I experienced on 20X. I am working up the courage to try and go back there so that I can see what really happened, but I know it will be a long time before I am comfortable enough to go that far. I've grown comfortable in this body the past few years, and I can't help but wonder what will happen if I can't make it back.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.